I'll be talking about my work with science and teaching and game design. So I am, in fact, a very serious, clearly, scientist. My work has to do with functional morphology, which is looking at the shapes of bones in mammals. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from Australia. I came to Australia because you guys have the most awesomely weird mammals. So, you know, I fit right in. The field that I'm studying is called evolutionary development. And if you want to know whether unicorns or flying pigs are more likely to evolve, ask me after. Because I'm actually going to talk more about what I'm doing with education outreach. This is a photo of me teaching roughly 150 Stanford students in a college biology class. If there's ever an experience that will get you over a fear of public speaking, it was that one. And combining these two interests and combining a third of graphic design is where the educational game design component comes in. And the game that I'll be talking about today is my most recent game called Go Extinct. It's a game that's based off of classic Go Fish, but it adds an evolutionary tree for extra strategy and learning. And as you can tell, kids love it. Someone just went extinct in that photo. Say that again?
I'm using that as an insult from now on.
Yes, please. Yeah, that was actually, so he said I was going to use it as an insult, and that's actually the inspiration for the name. I figured biologists might, you know, insult each other by saying those things.
Man, you just went extinct.
So yes, this game allows you to tell your friends to go extinct. I got it funded through Kickstarter, and now my company, Steam Galaxy, is how I'm bringing it to the world. And actually, it's also fun for adults. These are the awesomely weird mammal curators at the Melbourne Museum playing around with Go Extinct. So I feel like it's not fair for me to talk about games at a pub without having some drinking game rules. So the rules for tonight are, if I say anything jargony, like drink, because that will help me remember to define my terms. And second, drink for puns. I can't resist a pun. And you all want to have a good night. And finally, every time I say the phrase unity and diversity of life. So those are the 3 rules. I'll keep them up for your reference, don't worry. And kind of our introduction path tonight, we're going to be kind of going around, starting off with science is creative. If you leave with just one thing tonight, I want you to remember this. Science is creative. And to explain or give an example of how science is creative, I'm going to talk about how Darwin came up with his brilliant idea for evolution, give us a little bit of a refresher from our biology classes, which will then give a good background of what I'm teaching in my game, talk about the possibilities for games being a really great way to teach science and education, and finally, what does it look like to bring games actually into my own science work, and kind of what I'm exploring as a freshly minted PhD student. So, let's start with science is creative. And I love this like cheeky photo of Darwin, because it's like, nobody knows science is creative. And that's kind of true, right? Like science has this reputation of being all about like, you know, lab coats and number crunching, and I think that turns off a lot of people. I think, you know I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you can proselytize how creative science is, I think we would get more people excited about following this. So, defining our terms, creativity. We all know it's, you know, ability to think of new ideas, make them real. Another one that I found on Google is characterized by originality and expressiveness. I really like this one because it speaks to like expressiveness, and expressiveness is based on your own experiences and is very much a expression of who you are as a unique individual. And that, I think, is what is most valuable about each individual person, and something that we each bring that's new and different, and something that I think if more people knew was really important in science, then yes, we'll keep going with that. So, and then the last one is like, that is basically the definition of what you do with science, right? You're looking at the world in new ways, you're making connections between phenomena we didn't know about, and understanding the hidden patterns that make them happen. So, to give an example, let's go through Darwin's creative idea, the theory of evolution via natural selection. So, you may remember that natural selection is based on these 4 observations, and I'll go through each of them. First is that individuals within populations are variable. We all tonight look different from one another. And Darwin was an avid beetle collector. So full disclosure, I'm going to talk about the Galapagos a lot because I just went with my family, which is like biologist bucket list, best trip ever. And my dad and I were particularly nerding out about it. So we got these 2 massive tomes about Darwin's life, which even dampened our enthusiasm a little bit. But one of the funnier parts of that massive autobiographical tome were some of the letters that Darwin got from his father expressing such disgust for the amount of money that he was spending on collecting beetles. He would hire local boys to like go out and collect beetles. So this was something that Darwin was, this is what he did to procrastinate from his studies as clergy. He was in clergy school at the time. Clearly wasn't feeling it. And that's no shade on pastors. My mom is actually a pastor. Second, that this variation that we see, a lot of it's heritable. And I've put up this fantastic photo of different pigeons because one of the cool things to do in the landed gentry of Darwin's day was to breed domestic pigeons. This is like personally one of my favorites. It's like, really sassy pigeon, yes. So what Darwin did is he actually started doing this too, and what he found is that this crazy pigeon that looks so different from this crazy pigeon over here, he could figure out how to cross them and then end up with your kind of normal pigeon in the middle. And so what he was figuring out was like, oh, okay, so this variation, it doesn't just go away. It's still there. And this is what gets passed down. And it makes sense that kids look like their parents and that this would make sense for animals too. So the third tenet of natural selection is that there aren't enough resources on this earth for everybody to go around. And this was a really popular idea at the time. A lot of people were talking about it because of this guy, Thomas Malthus, who was one of the first people to go on to start sounding the alarm. Hey, there are too many people on this planet, or there are going to be too many people because we're increasing exponentially and our ability to create food is only increasing linearly. And what one of his creative insights was, oh, well, this also applies to the natural world too. And then the fourth is that, okay, if there aren't enough resources for everybody, who survives and reproduces, this is not random. The finches that are better at opening seeds, those are going to do better because they're going to get more energy, they're going to survive and reproduce. And of course, this is all based on Darwin's fantastic 5-year voyage on the Beagle, which was most of what that tome was about. And actually, very little of that time he spent in the Galapagos. Most of it was on the coast of South America, which meant that he was looking at a lot of the animals that were on the mainland form, and then when he got to the Galapagos Islands, he was like, oh wait, these look kind of familiar, but different. So, when we put all of these 4 ideas together, we get the idea, okay, we've got individuals that are variable, variation is passed down, and some individuals are going to do better. So I'm summarizing that here, and yes, I am using an awkward family photo to summarize that. And the idea that comes from this framework is that the traits that are most likely to get passed on, those are the ones that are adaptive. Those are the ones that are improving the survival and sexiness of that individual. And so then here's where another influence of Darwin's time and of his context comes in, is this is Charles Lyell, who was a geologist at the time, who was first starting to explain why we get fossils on the tops of mountains by using, oh wait, actually the Earth isn't 4,000 years old, it's more like billions. And over this time, the slow, gradual changes can uplift something that used to be in the ocean onto a mountain. So this is where this deep time idea, like, okay, if this is what's happening every generation, what happens when we multiply that by billions? We get this deep time component. And what's really funny is that, so this guy's a geologist, right? And Darwin was such a fanboy, but Lyell was writing these huge tomes again. And shipping, when you're on a voyage in the 1800s, was very complicated. So Darwin was like getting pieces of this book that he was really into slowly and slowly. So, you know, like about geology is geology cliffhanger. I remembered one of my puns. Okay, so again, with this deep time component, we've got this idea of, all right, well maybe there's family resemblances between individuals, but how about these populations? So another really important thing that you may or may not remember from biology is that the unit of evolution is the population. An individual can't evolve, but a population evolves. And so what if we started drawing connections between populations in a family tree? So say this is, you know, the tortoise that Darwin saw when he was on the coasts of South America. And then, okay, now we're getting to the Galapagos, and there's lots of these interesting forms of turtles. And so maybe the ones that are on these two islands are going to be more closely related here, that they separated from these ones and these ones. Okay, it's starting to make sense. Well, what if we go beyond turtles? Like, why stop with turtles? We've got a whole lot of vertebrates. And then, okay, well, why stop with vertebrates? And then this is where we get one of the most famous drawings. So famous that biologists everywhere tattoo it on various parts of their body. You can always spot an evolutionary biologist with that tattoo. But that basically this is one of the most profound and revolutionary ideas in science, is that all of these diverse animals that we find all over this earth once shared one common ancestor. It's turtles all the way down. Yeah, just gonna meditate on that a little bit. Yeah, one of the most profound scientific ideas, and you can see why this, you know, upended the idea of just upended the scientific community at the time. And what I really like about this image is that it's so simple, but it encapsulates so much. And again, it was one of the only drawings that Darwin included in his book, The Origin of Species. And I just love the little cheeky, I think. Great. Okay, so that was maybe the first evolutionary tree ever drawn. So this is how phylogeny we sometimes call it, but since we're not doing jargon tonight, evolutionary tree. So an evolutionary tree very neatly, like very compactly and efficiently, tells us two things very explicitly. First is these family relationships between species. So here we see, okay, actually crocodiles and birds are very closely related. They're more closely related than any other animal depicted on that evolutionary tree. And then we also get some of the traits, some of those adaptive traits usually, that they inherited from their common ancestor. So all of these animals have a vertebra, but only the primates and the rodents have hair, for example. And then you can also just implicitly get a third thing, which is again this idea of deep time, which is that, you know, crocodiles and birds split way later than sharks and the rest of these fish. Did you know we're technically fish? Okay, so this is where I'm starting to bring in my own context and maybe a bit of expressiveness, is that as, you know, a very serious scientist, these phylogenies are basically Rosetta Stones. Whenever a scientist is introducing a new species or a new organism or group of organisms, we almost always throw up an evolutionary tree. And for other scientists, it's like, oh, okay, this is where it fits in. I can make inferences about, what that animal's like. If it's in here, okay, I know it has a vertebra. But it's a very compact and efficient way to convey information. But I was contrasting that to my experience in the classroom with, very highly motivated biology students. And teaching evolutionary trees was actually one of the toughest things that we did. And how many of you are feeling a little bit of empathy with some of those Stanford students? Okay. Yeah, I mean, what I think makes it difficult to convey in a linear format, like what I'm doing now in a lecture, or what you would do in a book, is it's a non-linear diagram, and that the best way to interact with it is through a game. Yeah, and when I put on my game designer hat, I realized, okay, phylogenies, evolutionary trees, from a game design perspective, they're just sets within sets. Humans, we're primates, we're also mammals, we're also vertebrates, we're also fish. All of these things apply to us, and that actually makes a really interesting game system. And so I'll explain a little bit how this game works. Again, it's like Go Fish, where you're passed a hand of cards, and what you're trying to do is, instead of collect sets of the same number, you're trying to collect sets of closely related animals. And here I've color-coded them, so the darkest green here are all the dinosaurs, Stegosaurus, Machungosaurus, Apatosaurus, and the chicken. That's like always the kids' favorite fact, that they've been eating dinosaurs all this time. And aren't they so delicious? Yeah, so in order to get the dinosaur set, you would need one of each of those animals. And when you're first given your set, you usually don't have all of them. And so in order to get the ones you're missing, you have to ask the other people at the table for animals. But here's where the strategy and the learning comes in. You get to decide how specific you are. So you could ask for the chicken, but that pretty much gives away what you have. So it's a little bit sneakier to ask for dinosaurs. In that case, the other person could give you the chicken, or they could maybe give you a few of these. So there's a little bit of a trade-off, which is interesting in a game system. So there's a little bit of a trade-off of a risk-reward, which is like what games are built on. Anyway, game nerd moment. So what ends up happening is that one of the best strategies for this game is actually the learning objective, which is, if you look at your hand, maybe you have a Stegosaurus, a pterodactyl, and maybe you're lucky, maybe you also have a Tuatara. You could ask for, the dinosaurs, the pterosaurs, or the tail losers, as they're called in the game. But it's actually a way better strategy to say, okay, actually all of these are here. Why don't I ask for their common ancestor right here? I'm going to ask for the holy heads. And all of those fun nicknames are inspired by the trait that they inherited from their common ancestor. So the game is trying to encode as much science as it can, while doing so in an entertaining way. So this game has been very successful at teaching kids as young as 6 how to read evolutionary trees. So we've gone from college down to 6, and this is, I think, an example of what kind of promise games have in education. And that, one, they're getting kids out of just kind of sitting passively taking in information. They're actively engaging with this evolutionary tree. They're actively engaging with each other. And one of the coolest pieces of feedback that I've gotten from a teacher is that games also engage an audience that isn't always engaged by lectures. Isn't that interesting? So it's getting kids who maybe aren't used to knowing everything to being like, oh, I'm actually really good at games. Like, why don't I teach the straight A student how to play? So that's, and that has led to test scores improving. So that's the only data I'm actually going to present in this talk. And all of them come away very well with this idea of, okay, the sets within sets, and that you get this unity and diversity of life. And all of these diverse animals once shared a common ancestor, which is like, that was the goal. Cool. One of the most fun projects I did, though, was, okay, yeah, it's great to get kids to play a game, but what if I could get kids designing games about science? I can tell you, I'm very across the hermit tree after making this game. Like, wouldn't that be a great experience to give to a kid? So this is Jane in the center image here. She's a 9-year-old from San Francisco, and she frickin' loved cats. And so we found the most recent scientific article going over the evolutionary tree of the family Felidae. And this is published in Science, and printed it out, and Jane was like, cool, no problem. There's us kind of going through the tree, and what she's doing there is she's making design decisions about which cats would be most interesting to include for game players, but also which cats best represent the tree as a whole. So she's not only using this, this diagram, but she's also interacting with it, coding it, and making decisions about how to personalize it for herself. There's her presenting her final work with Go Extinct Cats. And I brought a copy of the game that she created at the back, and she wrote all the flavor text for the cards, so it's just like, it's priceless. It's really good. But the moment for me was watching her explain this to her mom, where she was explaining, okay, well, so tigers are over here, but our domestic cat is over here, and because they only connect down here, that means that they shared a common ancestor a long time ago. Like, she really got what was going on in this evolutionary tree. And I just want to take a break for a moment and talk about, we've been talking about a lot of biodiversity, but this is why another kind of diversity matters. You hear all the time initiatives about getting more diverse people engaged in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, but we rarely talk about why. Like, why is that important? I mean, first, I think there's two very good reasons. First is that everyone should have the ability to do what actualizes them. Everybody should have the ability to pursue what they are passionate about, and for a lot of us that is science. But from another perspective, again, creativity is characterized by originality and expressiveness. And where does that expressiveness come from? It comes from all of our unique experiences. And so if we want the best science out there, we want the most diverse scientists' body that we can possibly have, because they're the ones that are going to be making the connections between unrelated phenomena. So, just a little PSA. And that's what I'm trying to do with my company, Steam Gods, is that our mission is to inspire a greater diversity of kids, especially girls and underrepresented youth. And one of the ways we do that is by emphasizing how important creativity is in all of these fields. So, taking my own advice, like, what does it look like? All right, so I have this perspective of putting games in science. Yeah, drink for that one. So the research that I did prior to my PhD was on a group of animals in North America called the gopher, which you may have been introduced to by a Bill Murray movie, which I've avoided watching. I just can't. It's probably not actually a gopher in the movie. Anyway, so those colors, so this is the evolutionary tree of the group of organisms I was looking at, genus Thermomes, which means heap mouse because they make heaps of sand when they burrow, and they're called pocket gophers, not because they fit in your pocket, though they probably would, is because they have pockets that hold the leaves as they forage, so they don't get dirty as they're digging. Anyway, cool fun facts. But all these colors you might recognize from this game, where I'm using color to encode this idea of, okay, these are very related, these are also related, but maybe a little bit less so, and so that you get this, again, the idea of unity and diversity of life. But it's actually really helpful, thank you, it's actually really helpful for me as a scientist to, okay, all of these colors, okay, each one of these represents a different species or subspecies in this case. But it also helps me remember which ones are related, so that when I'm looking at graphs like this, I can make observations more easily. Don't worry too much about what this graph is showing, except that this axis is size. This is some abstract idea of space, and you'll notice that, okay, while these two groups are very different in size, these two groups of gophers seem very similar on shape. And that's easier to see that these two look more similar on this aspect of shape than they do to the gophers that they're most closely related to because of color. And actually this is an observation of what's called convergent evolution, when two separate groups of animals converge on a shape. This is a case of convergent evolution no one had noticed before. So that's an article I submitted last week. Now, I'm not sure that it was necessarily having a games perspective that showed that, but it was definitely having an idea of color that helps make it obvious and communicate it. So it's an example, another example of how creativity is important in science. Continuing to take my own advice, now that I'm a PhD student, one of the first things we have to do is a literature review. I just got done telling you about Jane and her phylogeny of cats. Well, now I'm in Australia, I'm getting acquainted with the native rodents of Australia. I should make a game about them. So I am. So this is part of the very, very cool native rodent phylogeny. Like rodents, because they're placental mammals, I think get a little bit overlooked in Australia because you have such cool marsupials and monotremes. I'm a little bit like, oh, I came all this way. But what this phylogeny is showing, and now I'm using color in a different way, is to show where these different animals are from. So Australia is really neat because it used to be part of Gondwana, right? So it used to be connected to Antarctica and South America, and so it's actually come a long way to get closer to Southeast Asia. And so for a long time it didn't have any terrestrial placental mammals. In fact, rodents are the only group of native terrestrial placental mammals. Sorry guys, we're not included in that group. So what's cool here is that as it got closer to Papua New Guinea, changing climate meant that occasionally there were land bridges that allowed rodents to pass. But some of those rodents just stayed in Papua New Guinea. So the blue are the rodents that stayed in Papua New Guinea. The green are the rodents that made it to Australia and then diversified. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but some of those lines are both blue and green, which are the ones that managed to make it to both. And of course, there's another half of this phylogeny, and all of the Australian rodents are green and gold. So we'll see. So far, it's actually been very helpful. It's sort of like making flashcards for myself. But eventually, what I hope to do with this is, one, okay, helping with my lit review, but two, I think I can make it into a game maybe aimed more at college students about, okay, now you've learned how to read evolutionary trees. Now let's practice using them to frame research questions, and maybe you can help me write my PhD. So with that, just thank you again for listening, and I want to give you just a few action steps, and the most important one is advocate for diversity in science. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the more people we can have out there communicating, especially to kids, just how creative science is, I think we can get more excitement. And just remember, we need everyone's perspective. If there's a kid in your life, no matter what gender they are or how they identify, just get them out into the amazing wilderness that you have here in Australia. Read them articles about science, communicate what you know about science. Just do everything you can to include everyone. And if you want to know more about what I'm doing with my company, Steam Galaxy, you can check out our website here. One of the things we do is we make a free print and play educator edition of Go Extinct. So if you know the school that might benefit from a game like this, it's totally free. They can print as many as they want, and it's Australian science standards aligned. If you would like a Go Extinct game, the best way to get it in Australia is from Questcon's online store. Sorry, shameless plug. I did bring some of my new games that I'm working on after the talk, including Jane's wonderful cat version of Go Extinct. So that's it. I'll take any questions.
We'll answer any questions for Ariel, the gopher lover.
I guess I'll ask one. So obviously kids love games, so that's a really interesting way to get them into science. Do you have any other ideas of other activities that you might think of that might help kids sort of get into science?
Yeah, so the question is, games are great to get kids in science, what else might there be? So I think games are particularly good because science is often communicating how systems work, and games are a system, so getting kids to engage in systems through games is, I think, a particularly efficient way of communicating science, which is why I'm focusing on it. But there are, of course, plenty of ways to do that. One of my friends in my lab is volunteering for Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots organization. They're doing a climb for chimps. I forget the date. But if you look up Roots and Shoots Australia, there's a climb for chimps, and the Queensland one, I'll be there. It's basically a hike with young scientists leading all the kids and answering any questions that they might have as they walk along. And what is really neat about Roots and Shoots is that it's very kid-directed. It's like, okay, what are you interested in that relates to animals, peoples, the environment, and how can we help that interest? So I think that might be a good first thing to have.
Any more questions? Or?
Really just for myself to make work easier, I'm doing some work with kindy kids that are Indigenous and trying to help them get into kindy and do more stuff. What would you like them to be doing?
What age group are they?
4, 5.
4 or 5. I mean, anything that they're interested in with science, I think is great. Like, so going outside, for example, I think is something that's not done enough in schools. Just like go outside and ask questions. Is there? I feel like I'm not answering your question.
Like I saw that there's
Collecting, yeah.
activities like where they put Smarties in a dish of water and you can see the colour come out. Like that's great for physics, but something more practical that they could do, like the games, that's maybe for a lower age group.
Yeah, actually, one of the first science activities that I remember doing was going to a local Audubon center. I'm not sure if Audubon exists in Australia, but it's a bird-oriented conservation group that does a lot of outreach. And the activity that they let us do, and I think I was about 5 or 6, was pick apart owl pellets. And there were all these mouse bones in it. Now I study mice. Go figure. So like anything like that, where you're collecting things that you find outside, or just engaging with what's local. Like one of the most important things I think for science outreach is to make sure that it's relevant to your audience. And games have a head start in this because games are awesome. Biased, but I think kids agree with this too. So any way that you can make that science really relevant to your kids, I think is great.
Are you planning to get your game on digital format?
Am I planning to make the game digital? I've been exploring this, and yeah, I woke up at 6 a.m. yesterday so that I could talk to someone on the East Coast of the United States about maybe partnering with a museum to do it. The thing about apps is that it's really hard to get them discovered in the App Store because there's just so much out there that you really have to have either someone with a lot of money to throw at marketing, or if you can find a partner, like a museum partner, who already has the audience and the reputation of doing good science education. So it's something I'm looking into. And I think what I would be most excited to make right now would be a digital platform where it's really